Hey, Osyka Youth Group, Brother Reed here. This is Wednesday night message. Let's see, what's the date? That would be Wednesday night, April the 1st. And I'm not going to do April Fools on you guys. But anyway, we've continued on in the book of Acts. So we're in Acts chapter 27. If you want to follow along in your Bible, there's going to be some names and some places that I might not pronounce right. But anyway, Acts chapter 27, it says, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in an Drapian ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, I guess is say it, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. From there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. When we had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty had arrived off Cnidus, since the wind did not permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon, and with difficulty, sailing past it, we came to a place called Far Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. When considerable time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, Paul began to admonish them, and said to them, Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only for the cargo and the ship, but also for our lives. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there if somehow they could reach Phoenix. Excuse me. They could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing facing southwest and northwest, and spending the winter there. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But before very long there rushed down from the land a violent wind called Eurquilio. And when the ship was caught in it, and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along, running under the shelter of a small island called Claudia. We were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After they had hoisted it up, they used supporting cables in undergirding the ship, and fearing that they might run aground on the shadows of Syrtis, they let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. The next day, as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, from then on all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. When they had gone a long time without food, Then Paul stood up in their midst and said, Men, ye ought to have followed my advice, and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred this damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood before me, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on a certain island. But when the 14th night came, as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. They took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms, and a little further on they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. Fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, Unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, Today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore, I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation. For not a hair from the head of any of you will perish. Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. All of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders and hoisting the foresail to the wind. They were heading for the beach. But striking a reef where 2 seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow struck fast and remained immovable, but the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest should follow, some on planks and others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land. Now, something I want, there's a few things I've highlighted here to make note of. In verse 3 it says, The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. I've made comments to you guys quite a few times about when it talks about laying on hands of Paul, when they laid hands on Jesus and all that. It wasn't nice. It wasn't like, and I've referred to this quite a few times in church, whenever we bring up somebody that needs prayer, and all the men will lay hands on them and pray for them. This is a total different situation, because after we lay hands on people in the church, they don't need to receive care in this sense. So Paul had been beaten, and he probably had wounds and stuff. So thankfully Julius was a seemed like a pretty good guy. I mean, he let Paul go over to his friends and receive care. So that was a good thing. Um, Now you go on down, and it gets to the point where uh, they're they're trying to sail, and they're running into this storm, and it's the more into the storm they get, the more dangerous it gets, and it reminds me of Jonah, when Jonah is trying to run away from doing what he's called to do, and he was sent by God to Nineveh, and he avoids that place, and he ends up in this storm um, because he's going in the wrong direction. Uh, Whether they were going in the wrong direction or what, I think it was mainly probably because of the way they were treating Paul. You know, it was they were seeing this, and also because of something I'm going to touch on down here a little further down. Um, it was for God's power to be shown. Uh, I mean, he always uses those uh, times. But something I want to back up to, and I remember talking about this in Acts 23. Paul is before the council, and this is before. Let's see where he had just left. He was at Jerusalem, and we remember the story about that. But in verse 11 of chapter 23 it says, "But on the night immediately following, the Lord stood at his side and said, 'Take courage, for you have solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem, so you must witness at Rome also.'" And we had talked about that before, that times, I mean, Paul would be coming into an area and it would look dangerous and everything, but the Lord would either in this one it says the Lord stood at his side and told him this, but there's other times that an angel would come and rest assured that hey, you're in God's hand, and you're going to be okay. So it always gave Paul extra courage, knowing that hey, this is, and the next verse, in verse 12, it talks about there's a conspiracy to kill Paul. But see, Paul knew that the Lord had stood beside him and says, hey, you're going to be able to go, and you did a good job in Jerusalem, I'll need you to go to Rome. So nothing is going to stop that. We have to remember that God's plan, nothing can stop his plan. All right. So Paul knew that because of that, he was going to make it to Rome. So in this, the one that we're talking about tonight in chapter 27, remember it says this in verse 23. It says, for this, let me back up. It says in verse 22, it says, "Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. For this very night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood before me, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you.'" When I read that, I think of, it reminds me of what we've seen in the past, the one I just read about, take courage. You did good in Jerusalem, you're going to go to Rome. I need you in Rome. So he's reminding him that, this storm's looking bad, Paul, but you're going to Jerusalem, so don't be afraid. Don't. But then it goes on, it says, "And behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you." What does that mean? I think we can go down further into here, and we see this time where the storm's getting worse, and then Paul says this. It's in verse 33, it says, "Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to have some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation. For not a hair from your head of any of you will perish.' Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. All of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food." Remember what we talked about in a couple, or was it the last chapter, the chapter before, where Paul gets in these opportunities, he gets in these situations, and he has an opportunity to live, not just talk about God, but to show his faith in God, to show his trust in God. In the midst of this storm, Paul's sitting there and he gives thanks to God and he starts eating. You know, I mean, they have been, it says they've been 14 days battling this storm, making sure, trying to keep everything together, trying to stay safe, trying to keep everybody alive. And Paul says, look, take courage. You're not a hair on your head is going to be hurt. None of you is going to perish. You need to eat. Take the focus off the storm and let's focus on God. And that's what he did. He thanked God. He gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke bread and he began to eat. And then all of those, they were encouraged, and I think all of them just and they ate. So we can be that kind of person. We can be in the middle of the storm. This virus going around, guys, there's nothing to play with. Don't get me wrong. But we as Christians, we need to remind ourselves of the faith that we have in Jesus Christ, that, like Paul said, to live as Christ, to die as gain. I mean, if we can get on that mindset of, yeah, we don't want to get it. We don't want to be sick. But listen, guys, there's a lot worse deaths than we can have. Nobody wants to die now. But we have to remember that our days are numbered. God has it all planned out. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know how bad this stuff is. I don't know, how painful or none of that kind of thing is. But I could pretty much tell you I would rather die of the coronavirus than of cancer. Because I've seen what cancer does to people. I've seen the pain, not only in the person with cancer, but in the family. I would rather get this. I would rather die from the coronavirus than be trapped in a burning building. Because it's the pain that's going along with it, and there may be a lot of pain along with this coronavirus. I don't know. I haven't seen that. I know it's in the lungs and stuff. It's the hard of breathing, but it can't be as bad as cancer. It can't be as bad as dying in a fire or anything like that. So, with that being said, as Christians, we should be the ones that are stable right now, I guess would be one of the words that we could use. Not running and in hysteria, reminding ourselves that God is in control of this. He cares for each and every one of us. He loves us. Don't let this stuff shake your faith. And that's what Paul is doing there, because he knows he's going to make it through this. He was told by God more than once. Because see, he was just told here in chapter 27, verse 23, he says, "For this very night an angel of God told me that we're going to make it." But he was also told in chapter 23 that he was going to be a witness in Rome. He's not in Rome yet. So God is reminding him, God is encouraging him to just stay on course. Stay on the course. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but stay on course. Just keep your focus on me. Stay on course. So he has this opportunity, and he says in verse 23, it says, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. And I believe it wasn't just that they're going to be safe, but God has given Paul an opportunity to be that witness in this storm. And I believe that's what we're to be right now. I've had not as many opportunities as I would actually like, because the glass shop has been kind of slow since this virus has been going around. But I've had some opportunities to speak to different people. You know, they say, "Man, what do you think about all this?" And I was like, "God's in control." And they kind of just back up, and it was like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, look, you know, all of this stuff that's happening is a test. It's a distraction. It's whatever you want to put it, however you want to think about it. But our uh, goal, or should be our goal, our reason for living, our reason for being a Christian, is to be in the middle of this storm, praising God and thanking Him, and reaching out and using these opportunities to glorify Him and remind people. Because I've had some of them that, they, after I get to talking about it, I was like, they're like, "You're right. I haven't thought of it that way. That God's still in control." And I was like, "Yeah, He's still on His throne. He's still in control. There's nothing we can do about it. Yeah, we can social distance to try to keep from getting sick. But guys, when our time is up, we can avoid the virus, but we may trip and fall and bump our head, and that's the end of it. I mean, anything can happen. Uh, so, and we see here it goes on, and you know there's still this thing of they're still scared and all that, but thankfully. It says, but the centurion, the soldiers' plan was to kill. In verse 42, it says the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. But see, here's God's hand again. It says, but the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, didn't, it wasn't that God's hand was just on Paul. Remember now, God told him that none of them would die. It wasn't just God's hand over Paul. It was God's hand over that whole crew. The whole group. What did it say? How many of them was it? I don't remember what the number was. I missed it. I dropped it here. 276. 276. Okay? Now, how many prisoners that is compared to other people, I don't know. But it goes there and it says the soldiers were going to plan. They were planning on just killing all the prisoners where they wouldn't escape, because they're in more trouble if the prisoners escape than if all of them are dead. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention and commanded that those who could swim jump overboard first and get to land. So he didn't just protect Paul. He could have said, "Hey, y'all can kill the rest of these prisoners, but this one here I want to take." No, all of them were saved. All of them were saved from this storm, and they were shipwrecked. Okay, so I think the big thing that we can take out of this, like I say, is remember that God is still in control. We don't know what all this coronavirus is going to bring. We don't know all the details, but God is still in control. And if we can rest in that, we can just step back and breathe. And I think that's the main thing. I think that's the big test, is how we react. And the world is watching. The world is watching to see how we react to all of this. And I think as a church, as Christians, it's our time to shine, and staying faithful, standing firm in the faith, not letting this stuff rattle us, and letting people see that. And I think it would be just like this. It says when Paul was breaking bread, it says in verse 36, it says all of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. And I think it would be, if people see us, how we react, and they see that we're not letting this stuff shake us, we're not getting all rattled and going crazy about it, and letting it really get to us. I think other people can be encouraged about it, and they can just rest and relax and allow God to use this situation however He sees fit. All right, so this is Wednesday night, so guys, I know Brother Jacob had sent a message out that we're going to be still postponing because of all this stuff. Guys, stay in your Bible. Keep watching. Get on Facebook and look at other people's posts and stuff. There's a lot of encouraging things in this time, and a lot of stuff you see on there now that you haven't been seeing. I think a lot of the Christians are starting to rise up and show their faith and try to encourage people. So that's the goal. That's our plan, and all we can do is trust Him. All right, guys. See you when I see you. Oh, and as far as that right there, I know everybody's probably looking at that just like, since it's happened, everybody at the shop was like, "Oh, what happened to your head?" And I go to a store, "Oh, what happened to your head?" And I'm the go-kart that the boys have, they'd put a piece of plexiglass as a spoiler on the back, and I was unloading it, and that thing had a sharp corner, and I didn't, being as this plexiglass is clear, and but it's funny, my blood is so thick, I wiped it one time and it's still, that's as far as I bled, so thankfully didn't have to go get no stitches, or I'm not worried about getting no stitches because it's not bleeding. I might have a little scar there, but that's fine. We all have scars. Alright guys, see you when I see you.